Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Today we'll be beginning a new topic. As you know, this series, Meezan lecture series, is meant to cover Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's book Meezan and his understanding of religion. So we have discussed his various interpretations regarding the social Sharia, regarding the penal Sharia, regarding Islamic customs and etiquette, and many other parts and many other sections of his book. So we are not proceeding in the chronological sequence or in the sequence in which these chapters occur in the book. We are proceeding in a way that I select and choose chapters, but ultimately they will be arranged in the sequence of the book itself. So today we are going to start off a very sensitive topic and a very, very important topic, and a topic which is fraught with a lot of misconceptions, and that is the Shari'ah of Jihad. Now, jihad itself is something that has become synonymous with qital, which means militant warfare, armed warfare to be more precise. And we also know that literally it just means to struggle in the way of God. So we have, at the very outset, we know that as far as jihad is concerned, the topic that we are going to discuss, or the meaning in which this topic would be discussed, is that latter meaning, which is armed warfare, and what exactly are the statutes of this armed warfare, what are the directives related to it, what is the nature of the obligation, and things like prisoners of war, and similarly divine help, similarly the uh, conditions of jihad. All these will be discussed one by one. So, in order to start off, we need to understand, first of all, that peace and freedom are two essential requirements of a society. Just as various penal measures help in protecting a society from the evils and excesses committed by individuals, resorting to armed offensive sometimes becomes essential to curb the evils perpetrated by countries and nations. As long as diplomatic relations and negotiations can be used to resolve matters, no one would endorse the use of force. So this is something which is a given. If things can be settled in a diplomatic way, you can sit and work out things. No one will obviously endorse the use of force. But at times it happens that if a nation threatens to disrupt the peace and freedom of the world, and its arrogance exceeds all bounds, a stage may come when the use of force and power becomes essential to keep it in check. So it is in such cases that it is the inalienable right of humankind to forcibly stop its subversive activities until peace and freedom of the world are restored. The Quran asserts that if the use of force had not been allowed in such cases, the disruption and disorder caused by insurgent nations would have reached the extent that the places of worship would have become deserted and forsaken, what to speak of the disruption of the society itself. So it says, the words that the Quran uses are, ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لهدمت صوامع وبيع وصلوات ومساجد يذكر فيها Allah kathira. Had it not been that Allah dislodged one people through another, the monasteries and churches, the synagogues, and the mosques in which praise is abundantly celebrated would have been utterly destroyed. So, had it not been that God dislodged this people through other people, as has been mentioned in this verse, it would have been become total chaos on the face of the earth. So the use of force actually is called jihad or qital, and in the Quran it can be classified into two distinct categories. This is something that we have to understand, that jihad in the meaning of armed warfare, jihad in the meaning of armed warfare is classified into two distinct categories. So the first category is against injustice and oppression. And second is against those who reject the truth after it has been conclusively communicated to them. So, in other words, if the truth has been communicated to people, then there is another category. And of course, this second category relates only to God's messengers, and the first category is a general one. Uh, as far as jihad is concerned, we must understand that the first type of jihad, which is against oppression and injustice, it is an eternal directive of the Sharia. So it is undertaken to curb oppression and injustice. So the first type of jihad is an eternal directive, but it can only it is something that shall only be taken to when the cause is oppression and injustice, and it is an eternal directive of the Sharia. But the second type does not relate to the Sharia. It relates to the divine law of Itmamul Hujjah, which means conclusive communication of the truth. This law is always implemented in this world directly by the Almighty through people whom He calls His messengers, who are bestowed with the status of Risala. In the history of mankind, for the very last time, this status was conferred on Prophet Muhammad. And the way this law has been described in the Quran is that وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ رَسُولُهُمْ قُضِيَ بَيْنَهُم بِالْقِسْطِ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And for each community there is a messenger. Then when their messenger comes, their fate is decided with justice, and they are not wronged. So, in other words, this second type of jihad, as you can see, clearly relates to God's messenger. So once the truth is communicated to their people through a messenger in a conclusive way, and they still deny it in spite of being convinced about it, they are punished in this very world. At times, this punishment is through earthquakes, cyclones, and other calamities and disasters, while at others it emanates from the swords of the believers. As a result, those who have denied the truth are totally vanquished in their land, and the truth reigns supreme. And the truth reigns supreme. So, in the case of Prophet Muhammad, the divine scourge took this very form, in which we know that they were destroyed through the hands of the believers. So, just as the Prophet and his companions were asked to wage war against oppression and injustice, they were also asked to wage war to punish the rejectors of the truth once it had become totally manifest to his adversaries. In other words, this was a divine plan executed through human beings. It should be viewed thus as a divine practice, and this is called Sunnatullah, and cannot be initiated by human beings in any manner. It is not part of the Sharia. The Quran has used this word, yu'azzibuhumullahu bi'aydikum. God will punish them by your hands. So we have to understand that these two types of jihad, these two classifications of jihad, they are entirely distinct. The first is against oppression and injustice, and this is an eternal directive of God. It will remain till the day of judgment. And the second is against people who deliberately deny the truth. This is confined to God's messengers. And this, once these messengers have departed, once the institution of prophethood has ended, we now know that the only legitimate means or the legitimate classification of jihad which is left and that can be resorted to is the first one, which is against oppression and injustice, and that too when negotiations, when diplomatic ties, they fail. So as far as this jihad is concerned, I would like to present how we will divide our discussion as far as our manners are concerned. So in this regard, we will find that our whole discussion is arranged in this manner, that we will discuss 5 major topics. So we have, first of all, we'll discuss the permission for jihad. Secondly, we'll discuss the actual directive of jihad, which actually encompasses, number 1, the nature of the obligation, number 2, the driving force behind this obligation, number 3, the ethical limits of this obligation, and number 4, the ultimate goal of this obligation. So this will be covered under the directive of jihad. Thirdly, we will cover another topic, which is divine help, which of course means that because this jihad is conducted for the cause of God, then there is a certain principle which God has outlined, that only when this principle is followed will people benefit from God's help, otherwise they will not. Then we will discuss the captives of war. This is also a very important thing, because we know that prisoners of war and these captives of war, they were regarded to be slaves in the times of Prophet, or another directive of regard. And then finally, we will discover the topic. We will discuss the topic of spoils of war. Of course, war booty and spoils of war, because they were an integral part of war. Because this is how the warring armies would do. They would gather a lot of loot and plunder. So laws were given regarding how they have to be dispersed. So let us start with the permission for jihad, because this is something. This is which is the starting point of jihad. That you must find out what exactly is the verse which permits people to undertake this holy venture. The Quran has discussed this in Surah Hajj, verses 39 and 40. So the words are, Uzina lillazina yuqataluna bi'annahum zulimu wa inna Allah ala nasrihim laqadir. Allazina ukhriju min diyarihim bighayri haqq illa an yaqulu rabbuna Allah. Permission to take up arms is hereby granted to those who are attacked, because they have been oppressed, and God indeed has power to help them. Those who have been unjustly driven from their homes only because they said, Our Lord is Allah. So we can clearly see that this is the first verse in the Quran in which the companions of the Prophet who had migrated from Medina as the Muhajirun, they were given permission to fight back if they wanted in case they were attacked. The Quran says that these companions were driven out of their homes because they believed in God as their Lord, and as such they were totally innocent. So if we see and reflect on this, we will come to the conclusion that this one sentence depicts the whole charge sheet against the Quraysh. The Quraysh, of course, were the ones responsible for driving away the Prophet and his companions. The reason for this is that no one is willing to leave his or her home unless compelled and oppressed for living there, and thereby utterly compelled to migrate. So the verse that we've just studied of Surah Hajj, which says, "Bi'annahum zulimu," because they have been oppressed. Because they have been oppressed, it is these words which refer to the aspect that I've just alluded to, and it is because of this ruthless and unfounded oppression that the Quran allowed the Muslims to resort to force against aggression. This right to use force has been given to the Muslims in their collective capacity. This is a very important thing that we have to understand. Every person who knows and appreciates the style of the Quran knows that the verses which authorize Muslims to use force do not address them in their individual capacity. Like the verses which mention punishments, of course, punishments are also mentioned in the Quran, these verses also address the Muslims as a community in their collective capacity. So any step which is to be taken for the use of force must originate from their collective system. No person or group has the right to take a step on its own in this regard on behalf of the Muslims. And we can also see that the word uzina, which means permission, is granted in the just referred to verses of Surah Hajj. It points to the fact that the very first question in an armed offensive is that of justification and permission. The Almighty permitted the Muslims of those times to fight back the Quraysh only when Muslims had political authority organized in the form of a state, in spite of the tremendous oppression let loose upon them. In these times also, we have to understand that this is essential. This is an essential prerequisite of war. In Mecca, we know Muslims did not have a state, and the oppression and injustice that they faced was enormous. So they were not given any permission to lift any arms, because they did not have the collectivity of state, which is the only duly authorized body to launch an armed warfare. It was only in Medina that this permission was given. And therefore, we have to understand that as far as waging war is concerned, it has to be a decision taken by the Muslim collectivity, which in other words means that the ruler of the Muslims, or the people who are in charge of the state, they will give this permission, and no one else does have this permission. So Prophet Muhammad is also reported to have said, he says that innamal imamu junna yuqatalu min waraihi wa yuttaqa bihi, which means a Muslim ruler is the shield of his people. An armed struggle or an armed offensive can only be carried out under him. An armed struggle can only be carried out under him, and people should seek his shelter for themselves in war. This very important hadith of the Prophet in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari tells us how important it is to realize and understand that war cannot be waged by individuals. It has to be from the state. It must originate from the state. So this was as regard as the punishment for jihad. Now we come to the second topic, which is the directive of jihad itself and how we have to address it. For this, we have a detailed directive given in Surah Baqarah, verses 190 to 194. I will not read out the Arabic text because it is quite a long text. For want of shortage of time, I will confine myself to its English translation. So this is the These are the verses which actually describe the directive of jihad. And in Surah Baqarah, the translation would be, and fight in the way of God with those who fight against you, and do not transgress bounds in this fighting. Indeed, God does not like the transgressors. And kill them wherever you find them, and drive them out of the place from which they drove you out. And remember, persecution is worse than carnage. But do not initiate war with them near the holy Kaaba unless they attack you there. But if they attack you, put them to the sword without any hesitation. Such disbelievers deserve this very punishment. However, if they desist from their disbelief, Allah is forgiving and merciful, and keep fighting against them until persecution does not remain, and in this land Allah's religion reigns supreme. But if they mend their ways, then you should know that an offensive is only allowed against the evildoers, a sacred month for a sacred month. Similarly, other sacred things too are subject to retaliation. So if anyone transgresses against you, you should also pay him back in the same coin. And have fear of Allah, and keep in mind that Allah is with those who remain within the bounds set by Him. So, once the permission to wage jihad was revealed in the verses of Surah Hajj that we just studied earlier on, a detailed directive regarding jihad was basically revealed in these verses of Surah Baqarah. All other ones which mention jihad actually elucidate and emphasize what is stated here, as well as elaborate on the right course in certain issues. And these, of course, were the issues that arose once the Muslims set about following this directive. Coming to the context of the verses that we've just studied of Surah Baqarah, we know that once the Baytullah was regarded as the Qibla, Muslims became anxious to offer Hajj. So we know that this change of Qibla did take place, and once it was reverted back to the Baytullah, it was but natural for the Muslims who had by now migrated to Medina to come and offer Hajj. And then they realized that the Quraysh would be an impediment to this. They would not allow them easily to come for Hajj. And if they offered resistance, matters could lead to an armed conflict. And the sanctity of the sacred months would not allow this to happen, because, of course, we know that Hajj is always something which is offered in the sacred months, in the months in which warfare has been prohibited. So a very natural question arose, and this question is that and of course this natural question was something that was replied to by the Quran, that if Muslims wish to perform Hajj in the holy month and they go there and are attacked, what should they do? Now the Quran has clearly said here that their sanctity cannot be violated. However, if the Quraysh take the initiative in waging war, I mean, not the Muslims, if the Quraysh take initiative, they start to stop the Muslims, and for this they raise their arms as well and launch an armed defense, then Muslims were told that they should fight them to crush their resistance. And this is what the context says. However, the directive does not end here. Remember, it does not say that they can just crush their resistance. It says that, the Quran actually extends this by adding certain details. It clarifies that the nature of responsibility the Muslims have been entrusted with jihad, and the real reason from which they should derive their motivation in waging jihad, the moral and ethical limits of this undertaking, and finally the real objective of jihad, all are discussed here. All are discussed in these 2 or 3 verses. And through these details, the 2 categories of jihad referred to earlier in this chapter, in this discussion, has been clearly set forth. Now we will discuss this directive of jihad in the light of these verses that I've just read out before you, under certain headings which I've already referred to. So the first thing that we will discuss is the nature of the obligation. The nature of the obligation, of course, is something that is the first thing. And the first thing that is evident from these verses is that Muslims should not merely fight the Quraysh if they resist them in offering Hajj. But as the Quran goes on to say, they should continue to fight them until persecution perpetrated by them is uprooted and Islam prevails in the whole land of Arabia. So it's not just that they have to stop here Quran says that now that the Quraysh have initiated war, now it will not just end at the end of persecution, but they will go as far as uprooting everyone who has undertaken this, and Islam will have to prevail in the whole of Arabia. Now, this obviously was a very big responsibility, a very big responsibility, and could not have been imposed on an Islamic state without giving due consideration to its moral as well as military might. So the Quran has explained this aspect, and it must be taken into account that as a result, the extent of responsibility would vary in different phases of the prophetic struggle. In the initial phase, when Muslim ranks basically consisted of the pioneers or the Sabiqun among the Muhajirun and the Ansar, and their faith and moral character were of an exemplary degree, they were required to fulfill this responsibility even if the enemy was 10 times their might. 10 times their might, which means that the nature of obligation was such that even if their enemy was 10 times their might, they could have proceeded in this regard, because if they were one and their enemy was 10 times their own number, then obviously what was meant was that the gap will be filled through the help of God Himself. So the words which are used in this regard have been described in the Quran, and the words are, and again, I'm just going to confine myself to the translation. Prophet, arouse the believers to war. If there are 20 amongst you patient in perseverance, they will subdue 200. So 20 will subdue 200. If 100, they will subdue 1,000 of the believers. But these are people without insight. So clearly we can see the Quran wants that if the believers are outnumbered by 10 times, even then they should proceed, because as far as the Quran is concerned, it says that the initial period in which Muslim ranks consisted of the pioneers, the Sabiqun. In this first phase, they had so much faith and so much trust in God that they did not require a large number. That trust would be something that would drive them to victory, and the gap that was left would be filled by God through divine help. Now, this was the first phase. So after it, many people entered the fold of Islam, which is but natural, though the number of Muslims increased significantly as a result of that. Yet the converts did not have the same insight in religion as their forerunners or the Sabiqun before them. So new people entered the folds, but their faith was of lesser extent. So the Quran reduced this burden of responsibility also. And it has mentioned this reduction right after these verses which I just read out to you. And they are, at this time, however, God has lightened your burden because He knows that some weakness has come into you. So if there are 100 of you patient and persevering, they will subdue 200. Now you can see the ratio has been reduced from 1:10 to 1:2. And if 1,000, they will subdue 2,000 with the permission of God. And in reality, God is with those who patiently persevere. So you can clearly see that as far as the Quran is concerned, it has reduced this responsibility. Initially, it was 1:10, and now it became 1:2. A similar policy was adopted by the Almighty regarding the extent of requirement that arose in wars that the Muslims had to fight. In the battles of Badr, Uhud, and Tabuk, the responsibility was much more, and each Muslim was required to present his services as a combatant. Those who have tried to shirk this responsibility was severely reprimanded by the Almighty. They were told that if they hold their life, wealth, and kin dearer than jihad, they should wait for the Almighty's decision against them, who would punish them in the same manner as He had punished, or as He had decided to punish those who deliberately rejected Prophet Muhammad. However, in military campaigns in which it was not essential that each Muslim offer his services, the Almighty informed the Muslims that though presenting one's self for jihad carried great reward, which by no means was any ordinary thing, it was not compulsory for each Muslim to participate in them. So this is another reduction that has taken place. And again, we have the Quran saying something to us. It says, not equal are those of the believers who sit at home without any genuine excuse, and those who strive hard and fight in the cause of God and with their wills and their lives. Allah has given preference by a degree to those who strive hard and fight with their wills and their lives above those who sit at home. Truly, for each, Allah has made a good promise, and truly, Allah has preferred those who strive hard and fight above those who sit at home by a huge reward, high status in forgiveness and mercy from Him. And Allah is forgiving. Allah is ever.
Okay, so if Dr. Saleem is able to come back, inshallah, the rest of the today's session is going to be converted into Q&A. The first question comes from Dr. Muhammad Asif. So this question asks, currently there is ongoing persecution by the Israeli forces in Palestine. Who is competent to take decision to wage war, to wage qital, and what would be the mechanism?
So, as far as Palestine is concerned, remember what is going on there is more of a militant warfare initiated by the Hamas, and it in no way can be termed as anything that relates to waging war by the state. So, the state of I mean, it's not like that the whole state of Palestine has waged war, just one part of it, and that too, which relates to Gaza. And the militant organization Hamas has done so. It has taken the first step. So I think that we have to understand that our emotions must not be strayed, and we must look straight, and we must also not be biased in this regard. Hamas itself and people in Palestine should undertake a peaceful struggle against. They have resorted to armed warfare, and the result is in front of us that thousands and thousands of people have been killed on both sides, more on the Palestinian side. So I think we have to understand that this is something that the onus of responsibility rests on the believers or on the Palestinian people, because or the people who launched that warfare. Because remember, it is something that they have done against these precepts of the Sharia. They have waged war as a group, number one. Number two, they have also killed civilians by doing so. They should realize that this is an absolute violation of the law of jihad. So I mean, in the first place, it should not be any militant warfare. It should be a freedom struggle, which always can take place in a way which is peaceful. But if there had to be a war, then it has to be the people who are living on the West Bank also, and people who are living in Gaza becoming one, because now we would have one state launching an attack. But then this never happened. We know this was basically an act of guerrilla warfare on the part of Hamas. So I think we need to first understand these details before discussing what can be done.
Thank you very much for that really well comprehensive explanation, Dr. Saleem. Our next question comes from Noshat Shafkat. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, I have a main question, but before I would go to that, what about the pre-October oppression that Israel had unleashed? That is my subsidiary question, but my main question is, you said that we are authorized to wage jihad against oppression and injustice. Now, up to the time of the Prophet, it's perfectly fine. But how does one later decide what is oppression and injustice enough to wage a war? For example, if there are people of a certain territory seeking independence from the mother country, then to the mother country, that is a rebellion. To those who are fighting for their independence, and mostly they ultimately get it, like Algeria, like many other states. So, how would we determine oppression and injustice enough to go for jihad? Thank you.
You see, in injustice and oppression, one form of that is very clear, and that is persecution, which means that the people are not allowed to practice their own religion. That is one form of oppression and injustice. And a very clear form, of course, is something that is understood to be present when you are not allowed to practice your own religion. So this is clearly something that warrants an armed warfare. But again, we have to understand that in such cases, armed warfare must only be resorted to, number one, when it is done by the state. Number two, when there is a chance of victory, because if you do so without realizing your own military might, it will be more of a suicide mission. And number three, never ever should the non-combatants be attacked. That is normally the case. So all these things have to be kept in mind.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I hope that answered the question. If you have another part to your question, please feel free to raise your hand again. Abrar, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
सर इसराइल पैलेस्टीन के हवाले से आजकल जो टू स्टेट सोल्यूशन का वो दिया जाता है कि इस तरह से हम टू स्टेट थ्योरी के थ्रू जो है हम उसका जो भी ये जंग चल रही है उसे ख़त्म कर सकते हैं। लेकिन कुछ उलमाए किराम का कहना ये है कि इसराइल पैलेस्टीन के हवाले से तो हज़रत उमर ने पहले ही फैसला कर दिया है कि यहाँ पर यहूदी आबाद नहीं हो सकते, और हम मुसलमानों की जितनी भी एम्पायर्स चाहे हम ओटोमन्स को देख लें तो उन्होंने भी हज़रत उमर की उसी ट्रीटी को फॉलो किया है। तो अब हम टू स्टेट कंसेप्ट जो दिया जाता है उसको हम क्यों माने, जबकि हज़रत उमर पहले ही फैसला कर चुके हैं इसराइल पैलेस्टीन के हवाले से।
This decision by Hazrat Umar is not based on a precept of Sharia. It is basically founded on the fact that they were guilty of certain war crimes and certain other breachment of contract, and therefore it was said that he must dislodge them from their place. It's not something of a permanent nature. It's not something that once it has come into their own in their own possession, then it's something that has eternally belonged to them. There's no such directive in the Sharia which says that once a country comes under the possession of a certain people, then it should remain in it forever. After all, after Hazrat Umar's departure in these so many 15 centuries, a lot has transpired. We have the Crusades, we have Muslims being given the chance that right in 1948, that instead of a two-state solution, we had a three-state solution in which the city of Jerusalem was regarded as an international entity, and there was a state of Palestine, and there was a state of the Palestinian people and the Israelites people. So this is something that has transpired in these 15 centuries. This has no basis that once Umar who made a decision, then that should be clung to. That was only something that happened in his own times when they had control of that area, and that too because the people who were living there, the Jews who were living there, they were guilty of certain crimes. I mean, this is not an eternal decision that can be clung to or adhered to for all times.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Our next question asks, is it that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, worked as an employee of Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha? If yes, then what are the details of it? As we've heard from a scholar that it is not true. ये गलत ही है क्या Prophet, peace be upon him, कभी भी Hazrat Khadija के सामान लेकर जाते थे?
I mean, what bearing does it have on everything that we are studying today in the name of religion? This is something which took place before he was called to prophethood, and if he was doing some business on the part of Khadija as a person who would depute himself for goods, or he was employed by her, or whether this does not take place, what essential impact does it have on the nature of religion that we have to follow? I mean, it's a purely academic debate, and I think it has no bearing on any of the statutes of religion. Whether the Prophet, because you see, the thing is that the details of history in that period are very, very, they're not very clear. The lines are blurred. So popular history does tell us that he worked for Khadija, and if he did so, I mean, I don't see any problem with that. And for example, if these details are not correct, even then, it's not an issue that has any bearing with any form of obedience to God or his religion or anything that calls into question the personality of the Prophet or his stature as a prophet. I don't understand how it relates in any way. It's just a historical happening, could be true and could not be true.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next questioner asks, often in our countries, boys and girls become friends on social media, and they don't know each other, but they talk to each other and they make friendships and relationships with each other. So what does Islam dictate about friendship between a boy and a girl?
So as far as friendship between a boy and a girl is concerned, I mean, this is something that has to be understood in its very essence. First of all, if a boy and a girl, they start to get acquainted with one another, and the purpose is, of course, to decide a marriage partner. This is something that cannot be objected to. Similarly, if you are class fellows in a school or have a common assignment, again, this is part of your own overall responsibility. The thing which has to be guarded against is that when you are friends with the opposite gender and you're not married, and especially if you spend time with that person alone, then things can always get out of hand, not only in the sense that some untoward happening can befall, but at the same time, the reputation of the two might be at stake. You see, that reputation is something which is very important as well. When someone gets to know that there are two people who are meeting each other in private or maybe even in public, and they are with one another, it gives that impression as if they have maybe eloped or could be in a situation to do so. That is something which causes great harm in the reputation of a boy or a girl. So the best thing I would suggest in this regard is that making friends, it all depends on what the word friend stands for. So if friendship relates to some common purpose, if it relates to some common objective, if it relates to something which has something other than that friendship element present as a stronger bond, as a stronger means of connection, it should be okay. But if you start having frank relations with the opposite gender, and you start laughing about and hanging around and similarly cracking jokes, and the way you do when you indulge in loose talk, it is here when things are not appropriate. And again, the reason here is what the Quran has said, that it is against the self-purification of a person. So you see, wherever Islam imposes restrictions on us, it wants us to be sensitive to our inner purification, or tazkiyah as the Quran calls it. So anything which goes against that inner purification or tazkiyah should be avoided. And this is where we need to instruct our younger lot that the supreme good or the supreme objective of religion is purification. And when we indulge in such activities, and there are others besides these as well, then we tarnish the mirror of our souls. Then we somehow contaminate our inner souls. And this contamination is something which Islam does not want, because when we start contaminating, then there is no end to it. So once the importance of this self-purification is delivered or is put across, only then this can be, people can really be very sensitive or on guard of this. Otherwise, if this sensitivity is not communicated, then it'll just become a directive, which might, like a dogmatic thing, it might not have an impact. So I think we have to make our younger lot understand that this self-purification is of supreme importance. And if you would like to give this importance the true emphasis that it deserves, then a person himself or herself will be on guard. So I think it is through this self-purification that we should approach. But other than that, as I said, this self-purification again is something that manifests itself in these relationships. And the purer these relationships, the more closer you'll be towards that spiritual enhancement.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We have two more questions that are within the same sort of realm, and they're asking a similar thing. And this is in response to your answer about Palestine war. So this one says that, agreed, it's non-state warfare going on in Palestine, which should not have become the case, but it is a fact that Israeli forces are targeting those who are not part of the guerrilla warfare. They're hitting hospitals and houses. Is this not the responsibility of Muslim Ummah to take note of the situation? And who and which country in Muslim Ummah would lead to take note of the situation? And the other question adds, can we wage war due to economic and social injustice and severe oppression?
So you see, as far as the first part of your question is concerned, we have to understand that this non-state activity, this non-state venture or misadventure was initiated by the Hamas, which has resulted in this huge affair. And remember that what has been done in this regard cannot be reversed. And it's just that you have given a lion, perhaps, which was sleeping, that you have just woken him up, and now he's ready to gobble you and to devour you. So we have to understand that and if you keep on doing this, if you keep on repeating the same thing in history in the last so many years, the result is not going to be different. as far as Palestine is concerned, we must always understand or empathetically understand the view of the Jews as well, and the Christians too, because you see, they have a stake on the Holy Land as well. For them, the Holy Land is as instruction, which is the third temple, is going to take place by the return of the Messiah, and so therefore they have to create an environment in that Messiah that they are waiting for is going to come and have it constructed. Some other view are of the view that unless they start this construction, the Messiah will not come. So you see, they have a world view of their own selves. We might not agree with it, but unless you understand where they're coming from, we'll not be able to, put the whole problem in its perspective. I think the most plausible solution was the one that was presented in 1948, but Muslims did not accept it. They wanted the whole land of Palestine to themselves, and I think this is where everything went haywire. And today, when a two-state solution is being presented, I mean, this is something of a lesser thing that they were to be given back in 1948. Now, of course, this is also something that is not being accepted. And secondly, we have to understand that as far as the Jews are concerned, and as far as believers are concerned, in this regard, the element of any third country intervening is highly unlikely, because we have to understand that behind the Jews or behind Israel itself is the United States of America. And the USA has given full support. And in their, I mean, whether we agree with them or not, I mean, they are fully supporting them. And so there's no country in the world who is in any way trying to, or any way has the guts to face the US, because they know that that country is behind this whole warfare. So I think we have to be realistic. And if we are realistic, then first of all, we should not have indulged in this warfare. And now that we have started to do this, we also need to understand the stance of these organizations, or of course the Israelites in this case, and that is when they blow up these hospitals and clinics, and their official stance is that the control room of the Hamas is in the basement of certain hospitals, particularly the strike that took place a couple of months ago, in which a lot of children were killed. It was not that they were killing these children innocently without any purpose. They alleged that in the basement of that hospital was the control room of the Hamas, and they were forced to attack that hospital because they needed to destroy Hamas's stronghold. And it was the Hamas which are using these hospitals as a shield, to protect themselves. And when they are exposed, or when the Israelites got to know that this is how it happens, then, as I said, it's like a catch-22 situation, in which what do you do when you know that there is someone down there beneath the hospitals working out their own strategy? Then I think we should perhaps also think that this is like a human shield which the Hamas is using, or maybe a disguise that they are using, and they are actually putting the life of the people or the patients of that hospital at stake. So I think we have to be very just in these analyses also. And third thing that I'd like to say here is that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of flake that is flying around here and there, because a lot of things are, I mean, we don't know what the truth is. The media has its own stakes. There are things that are reported in the media that are not entirely true. So first of all, I think the most important thing here is that our concepts should be straight, and those concepts relate to empathetically reflecting on the view that they have regarding the area of Palestine. And secondly, as I said, in this current situation, unless the Hamas they are willing to rework their strategy, just as the PLO did, the Palestine Liberation Organization. We know in the times of Yasser Arafat, they were too very militant. But then they realized that this militancy is not going to lead them anywhere, and they have now converted themselves into a peaceful organization. I think the Hamas too should follow this pattern and seek a peaceful solution. And as I said, it might take time, but it's an internal battle of freedom that they, or maybe not just freedom, but a division of land that they should accept.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Naushad Shafqat, please go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Perhaps I wasn't able to make myself clear with regard to injustice and oppression. My question related to the fact that how is it going to be determined that oppression and injustice has reached a level where a war can be raised? For example, in Kashmir, we say that the Muslims there are not allowed to use their to practice their religion as they should be, and because of the treaties that we have. So, if Pakistan wages a war with regard to Kashmir, would that come within the definition of jihad?
I think that first of all we have to understand that the struggle within Kashmir has to be peaceful. If they have resorted to arms themselves, as is the case, then I mean, how can any external territory or external country like Pakistan interfere? That would be even more wrong for us to do so. The struggle for independence or division, whatever you may call it, must be peaceful in itself, and I mean, it should be as democratic as possible. And at the same time, we know that in the last 40 or 50 years, this struggle has resorted to militancy over various instances and various periods of time. So, unless the internal struggle is also peaceful, because this is not the case always, and because internally they have been fighting with each other and not only themselves but against the Indian army, maybe, then we clearly can see that it's not just a case of peaceful negotiations or a peaceful outcome. It's basically, it has turned militant in its own self. So one of the things that has to be understood is that the area in which this militancy is going on, that has to stop first. Otherwise, any intervention from the outside in the form of an armed struggle would not be justified, because people who are inside are not justifying themselves.
Abrar, you're up next. Please go ahead.
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन था, मैंने अभी हाल ही में गामदी साहब का मौक़िफ़ पढ़ा था अहले बैत के हवाले से, जिसमें उन्होंने आयत तत्हीर के हवाले से वज़ाहत की थी कि कुरान पाक में तो इस बात में कोई शक नहीं कि आयत तत्हीर में जो अहले बैत का ज़िक्र हुआ है, वहाँ पर तो नबी इस्लाम के अज़वाज मुतहरात ही हैं। लेकिन इसी आयत तत्हीर की जो एक्सटेंशन है, हमें एक रवायत के अंदर देखने को मिलती है, जो कि पूरी की पूरी उम्मत ने अमली तवातुर के ज़रिए ट्रांसफ़र की है और उसे हदीसे किसा कहा जाता है। इसमें नबी इस्लाम ने हज़रत अली को, हज़रत फ़ातिमा, हसन हुसैन को भी जो है इस आयत के अंदर इंक्लूड किया था और ये भी कहा था कि ये भी हमारे अहले बैत हैं। तो अब मेरा आपसे सवाल ये था कि अब जो ये रवायत है, ये सनदन भी मैंने इसको सही पाया है, आप इसे आखिर रिजेक्ट क्यों करते हैं? मुझे ये चीज़ जाननी थी कि इसे रिजेक्ट करने का रीज़न क्या है?
You see, anything which is against the Quran, even if it's not is correct, will not be accepted. It's as simple as that. You don't need an isnad to be faulty in order to reject it. Anything, this is a rule which our muhaddisun have stated, that any narrative, even if it is correctly reported, if it goes against the Quran, it will not be accepted. It is as simple as that.
सर एक सप्लीमेंट्री क्वेश्चन था मेरा इसी के हवाले से, प्लीज़ अगर आप इजाज़त दें।
Please go ahead.
सर कुरान पाक के खिलाफ तो ये हदीस तब होगी ना जब कुरान पाक ये डिनाई करेगा कि कोई और अहले बैत के अंदर इंक्लूड नहीं हो सकता, जबकि इस रवायत के अंदर खुद नबी इस्लाम एक्सटेंड कर रहे हैं अहले बैत की बाउंड्रीज को।
As you can clearly see, the word Ahlul Bayt, the way it has been used in the Quran, it cannot go beyond the wives of the Prophet. Because you see, if you study Surah Ahzab, where this verse occurs, the address of this whole surah are the hypocrites who were creating mischief, who were trying to bring the house of the Prophet into disrepute. They were trying to scandalize the wives of the Prophet, their personal lives. So it is by addressing them that it is being told, Ya Ahlul Bayt, that for you, the Almighty wants to purify you, and the filth with which these people are trying to besmear you, God would not allow that to happen. So you see, the whole context of the Surah Ahzab and the way things have been arranged clearly tells us that it's the wives of the Prophet who are under discussion and not anyone else.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Bismillah, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. So my question was regarding Hajj. So the three points, Mina, Arafat, and Muzdalifah, where the people camp for in some cases overnight and for a few hours. What is the religious ritual precedence of it? Was it happening before the Prophet also? And why three different lands? Is it supposed to be Hashar ka Maidan? What is it supposed to signify when you pray there?
I mean, each of these three have their own significance. Yes, the Prophet offered it exactly, and ever since his times, Muslims have been offered in the same way, because you see, Hajj symbolizes jihad against Satan, against the foremost enemy of Islam, and it's like an army which is envisaged. It camps at one place and goes at another place. Their imam gives a khutbah. They follow his bidding, and then in the last of their the last rites, they pelt those jamarat with stones in order to bring it to that quintessence that now that everything has been done, we are going to pelt these stones and make our intention known, that as far as the Prophet's enemy is concerned and the Prophet, an enemy of mankind, is concerned, he is going to be hated in the same way. When once we return from our Hajj, we will have the same hate for him the way we had this hate when we were throwing these stones. So basically, because of the fact that this Hajj symbolizes jihad, in which an army goes from one place to another, that is why, I mean, all these details are presented. I mean, it's not just at one place. You go from one to another place. It is just like an enemy pitching tent at one place and then finding a better place, or maybe a more appropriate place, and then culminating in that final place in Mina, when you go for the Rami or the stone.
And I'd like to thank you all again massively for your patience today. We kept on getting those little interruptions in the middle and technical issues. So thank you all for sticking through and being very, very patient. Much appreciated. And see you all tomorrow, inshallah.